So panelists have comments to each other? Any? Okay, in the room. Margaret.
I just love hearing this conversation, and I was also love being challenged by Ruby's and Ralph's and Michael's comments earlier. And just go, Ben. you go. And I love Taylor Mack too, and I saw that piece, and it was fabulous, and I hated turning off my cell phone, but I did it. I was just thinking about these temples of culture, and here I am on the stage where I am part of and I witness with our production staff the incredible nervousness when even a very traditional artist will invite somebody to dance on the stage, let alone opening the backs of our buildings. We live that worry. We have been so deeply trained to be the caretakers of these temples. We are the ones who sweep them. We have to rub out the marks on the black that we don't want to show during the performance. So I think I totally embrace this idea. It makes me incredibly nervous, and I love that.
Great. Chuck?
It's not necessarily something I think that the panel can answer right now, but maybe something that should be built into this discussion, because a lot of the things that were touched on Tom's presentation of the different spaces and some of the things that Ralph and Ruby and others got into earlier today was this idea that there are sort of expanded, evolving roles for these kinds of art centers. When we take on the creation of new work, when we create more intimate performances for smaller audiences, what is the economic implications of this in terms of the amount of revenue that's generated through ticket sales? Because for many performing arts centers, particularly in campuses, this is a rather steep slope already. And it's based on, the traditional ways that we've done business for many, many years. And when it's even tougher, because oftentimes this is not only the measure of success, but it actually has been a success. But if we're going to embrace an evolving roles and embrace expanded things that do not necessarily generate revenue, how are we going to redesign our economic models that we can sustain for this activity?
Jenny, Jenny and then Ben. Ben and then Jenny.
To me, the most two fascinating organizational attempts to reinvent the business model right now in the world are the National Theater with the creation of the 10-pound ticket and the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, which basically at its heart has said, what happens if we see the concert hall not as the venue but a venue? And so they've dispersed their programming throughout the community. They have said, what happens if for a symphony orchestra, every ticket is either $10 or $20, which for symphony is huge, and what happens if we reinvent the business model? They've had a huge success, going from roughly 62% of paid capacity to now 94%. They have engendered huge, huge community excitement around it. What we think they may find is at the $10 or $20 ticket price, people will come more often. They're going to be more adventurous in what they sample. They'll be less angry when they encounter work they don't encounter. They already recognize the $10 ticket is a kind of gift they're more willing to give individually. And they've done all this by taking $1.5 million out of the marketing budget because they don't need to market in the same way. At heart, the National Theater began by saying, what's the difference of playing at our current capacity at 62% versus what would it be if we played at 93% at £10 a ticket? And they said the hole was not as big as we imagined. And so I think fundamental to your question, if we at least entertain what is the counterintuitive and really look holistically at reinventing that model, we may be surprised about how we might be able to achieve new results in these new times.
I'm just going to add one more example to those two. World Music Crash Arts, small organization nearby here in Boston a year and a half ago, wanted to attract new audiences and realized that over 10 years they had cut back 40% of their programming to make this old economic model and success metric fit. So they decided to take a risk, and they added 50 concerts in the 08-09 season. And they hired a guy who just ran street teams and did e-blasts, drove the marketing people crazy, Maury Aronson told me, and they figured they would lose on those. They would just take a bath on them, and they structured their budget that way. Those things sold out, and the traditional season ticket holders began to hear about them and come. And so now they're really trying to figure out how do we really move this throughout the institution. So I think that daring to think about it, daring to take some risks, and we've got to talk about a new set of metrics for success at the board table and in the organization. It just can't be box office revenue to make these things work. One other, LA Music Center has been for 5 years running an active arts program, and they did a carve out of $250,000 from the resident company, operating company money to do this. And it's hands off to the resident companies, and they have thousands of people participating in social dances, tradition bearers coming in and doing lessons, and they're having a series of conversations right now, they're finishing up, on re-envisioning these campuses, the places that are already built, and have found a way to figure it out and monetize it.
Yeah, just one additional point to that. This year, given the recession and whatnot, we experimented in two ways. We offered a significant discount to faculty and staff, and we received a donor subsidy to bring our student ticket prices from half to $10. And we did extremely well. We also reduced our marketing spend significantly because we had the commitment and the participation up front. People bought additional tickets because they had the additional money to spend. And they also contributed, so our contributions stayed flat. The frustrating thing for us is that the artists that we bring work in ways that our buildings are not suited to adapt to them. So although the business model worked on the marketing revenue side and sustained a certain operational equilibrium, the production challenges continue to be formidable. And that's something that we're hoping to address in our new space, because we see these recurring rentals and we see the recurring labor costs. And this has been, as long as we continue to do the work that our artists, present the work that our artists are creating, there's no cheap way around dealing with the confines of the spaces. And that'll be our challenge, hopefully surmounted with aspects of the new space.
Great, thank you. AJ?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about the sort of generational effects of the changes that we're talking about. I ask because, as we were saying earlier, I think that young people like myself are sort of looking for kind of a different approach to arts that is more interactive, as you suggest, but I think that there's also an older generation that is not only ambivalent about that, but in some cases quite resistant to it. Not in all cases, certainly, but for example, I would have a very hard time imagining my parents, who are arts people, having drinks on the stage during the intermission. I think that would totally blow their minds. But I would love to go to a show like that.
Actually, I would love to speak to that, because this is one of those really interesting things for me in working on a college campus. As I look over the subscription and the subscription orders as they come in, mostly from donors, it's quite curious. Yes, we absolutely do have chamber music diehards and people who want to hear exactly what's programmed and hear it in silence with no physical movement and whatnot. Kind of a minority for us. What I see is people picking across many, many different styles. They're the ones who come to all the curious installations, who love seeing the students in the audience, who have actually made a point of coming out for our student opening acts that we do on a number of performances at 8 o'clock. They don't come late, they come at 8 o'clock because they embrace what it is to create the arts on a college campus. And it's people of all ages, people who are so well traveled that they heard string quartets played in the halls where they were premiered, and actually come to the university to see things with a dynamic and an energy that they can't replicate elsewhere. And so I always, you saw me bristle obviously at this sort of the older, younger. Our audiences are kind of anti-monolithic, and it's wonderfully surprising it's wonderfully rewarding not to overly anticipate what one demographic or another will be engaged by. And that's a challenge as presenters. We have to assume that if it is creative, if it's specific to place, if the artists are compelling, that intelligent people will be curious, and they'll see the future, just as people adopt technology at many different points in their life, that they will be drawn to what that looks like in a variety of spaces and in a variety of contexts.
Okay, one last question there, please.
Can I just respond to that
Please.
just slightly to the contrary, which is just simply to say, on the other hand, I've had a lot of experiences going to symphony orchestras where people resent people quite visibly who applaud between movements, who are deeply disturbed by people twittering during performances, etc. And rather than dismissing them as the dinosaurs of the past, those people are major donors, they are major subscribers. They make time, effort, and energy to be there because that experience is deeply meaningful to their lives. And I don't take that lightly. And so all I would say is, to that end, I think the real question for organizations to figure out is, how do we begin to lead our audiences to different behavior rather than impose wholesale? The easy example for me is in the theater community, we learned very quickly that a young audience was being disaffected and not coming because they got off work at 5:30, and they said, why do I have to kill 2.5 hours before you want me in the show at 8 o'clock? And theater started saying, what would happen if we did a 6:30 or 7 o'clock curtain? And ultimately, they didn't say every curtain is now 6:30. They said one night in the run is 6:30. And then when they filled that one, well, then it was 2 nights. And now on Broadway, 7 o'clock is the standard Tuesday time. But it's really about measuring in experimental changes, making the audience aware of tonight is Tweet Suite night, so people are twittering tonight. And if you don't want to see that, come tomorrow night to the Beethoven when nobody's twittering. But how do you introduce those gradually and respectfully?
Great, thank you.
Just very quickly, it's lovely to hear Ben's charge with his 5 questions to be asked. I take issue with only one of them, Ben, and that was the last one, which was where you asked, what is the point of hiding technology? And I take issue with that only because when we looked at Tom Cam's presentation, we saw a number of performance spaces where architects' excitement with seeing the rabbit come out of the hat as they researched, being architects for theaters, say, wouldn't it be great if we could see the rabbit before it goes into the hat? And I think that making respectful choices about stagecraft, so the Wiley, somebody said, Tom said, Ralph Lemon would love the Wiley. He wouldn't, for the reason, the fact that if he leaves a pair of shoes in the dressing room, he has to go 7 floors to get it because there's no backstage. We saw that at the Landsborough, and it's an issue at the Kimmel. Many spaces where architects have said, let's express this space, let's put it all out in front. Performing arts people are extraordinarily good at triumphing over adversity, and architects are very good at helping them recreate that adversity to triumph over it.
You know, if I can just respond, the only thing I would say to that, and I totally get it, and that may be part of the flexibility issue, I guess I have two things to counter with. Number one, audiences to a person love knowing the backstage secret. They want to talk to artists. They want to know how things work. I still don't understand why we close the house and don't let audiences watch Focus. Because if you basically talk to any board member who's been into a 10 out of 12, they find it the most fascinating day they've ever had in their lives. And why we shield people from that, I think we lose an opportunity for affinity. Secondly, just from a purely selfish business model viewpoint, I think audiences who don't know underestimate the work it takes to mount a production. And I think it's a revelation to them economically and effort-wise to understand what it takes to make the work come alive. I'd love to see, just to ask the question, what would happen if we got rid of lobbies and everybody had to come in through the backstage door? So you had to walk behind the flat, you saw that there was a technique, just that change. And I totally get the idea of surprise and revelation, that may be flexibility, but I'd at least entertain the contrary.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to have some architects in the next panel, so we'll give them a chance to speak. I want to thank this panel for fabulous.